Well, it's been a long time, and for those of you who have not been coming to the live streams, obviously it's been a while since we've done some videos. But you know what? This channel was developed and born on certain series that were very popular back in my heyday. Regarding Godzilla, we had the March of the King series, we had Godzilla 30 for 30, we had all these speculation videos, and it's been a long time since we've done anything similar to that until now.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm!
Wait.
Everybody calm down!
As this series is going to be called Godzilla Best of the Best. And just to break it down for you guys real quick before you get into the first part of this series, this is where we're going to go into each era of Godzilla, Showa Era, Heisei, so on and so forth, and we're going to match up movies versus movies, other movies, whatever may have you, and we're going to pick the best ones in the era. But also, it's not only exclusive to within one era, we're also going to step back and go across eras and compare movies and see which ones are the best of the best. So for example, we all know there's only a handful of solo Godzilla movies, so we cannot compare solo Godzilla movies within one era. We have to pull it back and compare them all across. And we're going to do that in a different part of the series later on. This one, we're gonna start with the best Godzilla versus movie in the Showa era. And this is going to be a little tricky because there's a lot of them, and some of them don't even have verses in the title, and some of them we have to actually exclude because they would be considered more of an ensemble. For example, Destroy All Monsters will be in the ensemble category, and then another movie like Terror of Mechagodzilla is going to be in the Godzilla. I have a category where we're gonna pick movies where Godzilla is outnumbered, and we're gonna pick the best ones. Terror of Mechagodzilla is going to fall into that category. So the other two movies I want to talk about here are Invasion of Astro Monster as well as Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. We are going to include those in the verses, even though they're more like tag team matches, right? It's still Godzilla focused. He is the main hero in the movie. Might have a tag team partner like Rodan against Ghidorah in Invasion, as well as Rodan once again and Mothra. And we're going to include those because essentially Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is like a 3v3, 3 heads, 3 monsters. And then Invasion of Astro Monster or Monster Zero is more of a 2v3. So we're going to include those in the verses, and we're going to go through these verses movies very briefly. And then at the end, we're going to pick the best of the whole era. Now, I want to make things very clear. All right, my biased opinion will have no effect here. I might have a particular movie that I think is the best, does not necessarily mean that's going to be the one chosen. Why is that? Because I'm going to be as objective as I possibly can, leaving out my personal feelings on whatever movie may be or may not be picked. The other thing is, I told you on live stream last week, and if you guys were there, you know, but if not, I'm going to reiterate it here real quick. This best of the best list, this whole series, everything that's chosen is ordained by God.
No way.
Yes, this is not really me picking this. God came to me and he said, you need to do a best of the best Godzilla series, and these are the movies that are the best. I am saying they're the best because I am God. So picture like Moses getting the 10 commandments from God. Only it's me, and I'm getting the best of the best series from God himself. So it's irrefutable. Look, you can have your opinion, you can say what you want, you can vehemently disagree, you can get all hurt in the comment section. It doesn't matter. It's irrefutable because God said so. Hey, I didn't pick this. I did not ask for this. It was ordained by him. So take it up with God if you don't like the list. All right, let's get started. Godzilla best of the best in the Showa era, the best versus movie. And we're gonna start with Godzilla Raids Again. Now, Godzilla Raids Again, even though it doesn't say Godzilla versus, we all know this is a one-on-one movie, right? It's the sequel to Godzilla, and I gotta be honest, while there's some parts in this movie, and in particular midway through the movie, there's some great cinematography, and even though the story's not nearly as bad as you might remember, the problem with this movie is basically Anguirus dies a little more than halfway through the movie. There's a whole third act that doesn't even include him. So there's no real build up to this ultimate clash. I think this is one of the reasons why it's one of the weaker movies in the Showa era, why a lot of people criticize it. So while it's nominated, I think you can feel pretty confident that this one's not going to make the end of the list. Following that, we have King Kong versus Godzilla. This is a very, very popular movie among many fans, the first Kong versus Godzilla movie. And you know, you go through this movie and there's a lot of action. There's a monster fight between Kong and a giant octopus. I gotta be honest, it's not one of my favorite films, but the scene where Godzilla breaks out of the ice and heads towards landfall is one of my favorite scenes in this movie. And there is a very light link to Godzilla Raids Again, in which they refer to Godzilla coming out of the ice and referring to him how he got buried in the ice the movie before. So it's a nice little bit of continuity credit you get. It is one of the highest grossing, if not the highest grossing versus movie in this era. And many fans love this one, so this is definitely a big contender to win Best of the Best. Now let's move on to Mothra versus Godzilla. Another strong contender here in Best of the Best. Mothra versus Godzilla has a very solid story, basically about corporate greed. You got this corporation that wants to buy the egg, wants to use the land to build like this whole Happy Land, they call it, so that way they can show off the egg, and they put the egg in an incubator. It attracts Godzilla, and there's a big clash between, you know, the natives, the corporation, and some reporters. And then of course you get the twins, and you get Mothra, who's already pretty much dying before she even gets to fight Godzilla, puts up her last stand to protect her children. Her children come out, two little larva twin caterpillars coming out to fight Godzilla against all odds. And look, it is a great underdog story. This is actually a very, very strong movie, and it's a lot better than I think most people remember. So Mothra versus Godzilla, definitely a contender for Best of the Best. Okay, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, the debut of our favorite three-headed golden dragon. This is just a fantastic movie because you have Mothra, Godzilla, and Rodan teaming up together to take on a new big threat. And this is something you never would see. This is like Avengers before, you know, ahead of its time. You know, to see Mothra and Godzilla team up, as well as Rodan, to take on this new big threat is makes it a very exciting movie. On top of that, there is a very sci-fi storyline of a woman who seems to think she's from Mars, and it's a little bit ambiguous whether she was actually from Mars or just had a head trauma. They kind of play it off like she had a head trauma, but then she knew so much when she thought she was a Martian. And there's Ghidorah causing destruction, Rodan and Godzilla not getting along, Mothra trying to play a mediator. And then you got one of the funniest scenes, at least in the English version, where they're talking about the monsters using nasty language during their monster talk. It's goofy, it's a lot of fun, there's a lot of action, and definitely a contender for Best of the Best. Okay, then we follow that up with Invasion of the Astro Monster, or Monster Zero. And this is a classic, fantastic sci-fi story of an alien invasion, and basically the human race being fooled into thinking that these aliens are going to provide them with medicine and technology in exchange for using Godzilla and Rodan to protect their own planet. And then in turn, not only do they have Ghidorah, but now they control Godzilla and they control Rodan, and they unleash them against the world. And it takes a young scientist to come up with a crazy invention that had no chance of making it, but just so happens to be effective against the aliens. I think it's a wonderful story. I think it's a lot more grounded in some ways than you would expect, because again, it's another underdog story. You know, this guy who's down and out, he's trying to invent things, trying to be an inventor, and it turns out his invention essentially saves the world. And then you got a great finale. I mean, the finale in this movie, where you think all the monsters are down and out, they all get up and they're all back to their senses, and they just start brawling, picking up where they left off in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, with Rodan and Godzilla just going at him. So one of the best movies, definitely in the Showa era. So definitely a contender. Next we have Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, or as many of us know it, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. Look, you guys know I am not a fan of this movie. It is not, I just don't think it's very good. Godzilla doesn't show up to almost an hour into the movie. He's not in it very long. Ebirah is a very underwhelming villain, and then the story in between that is very, very dull in my opinion. I don't know too many fans of this movie, but I know there are some out there. But I gotta be honest, guys, it's probably not gonna have a chance to win Best of the Best, so we're just gonna move on. We have Godzilla versus Hedorah, or Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. I would probably consider this one of the more underrated versus movies in this era. You get this new unique creature coming in, the Smog Monster. He's basically empowered by our surroundings. He was born of sludge and filth and garbage and trash and all kinds of bacteria. Comes this monster who just releases sludge, and kind of, you could argue that it's actually crap. And also there's some horrific parts in this movie, you know, flying over a small portion of the city and people just evaporating into skeletons or turning into skeletons, instantly dying. You know, the damage he causes to Godzilla during their battles, you know, basically infecting one of his eyes closed. And, you know, it's a very odd, unique, it is flawed, a very flawed movie, but I think it has a chance. I would consider this one the underdog of Best of the Best versus movies in the Showa era. Moving on to Godzilla versus Gigan. You know, Gigan is a great monster. I know everybody loves him. I love him. You love him. Everyone loves him. And then you add in Anguirus into the mix. Everyone loves Anguirus. Hey, look, I love Anguirus too. Although everything I ever criticize about Anguirus, I stand by. He is a punching bag. He is not very smart. I mean, the guy goes headfirst into Gigan's buzzsaw. But the big problem with this movie is using old footage. There's a lot of that in this movie. It really takes away from it. You know, you do have some unique elements in terms of the aliens that are trying to take over the planet, but all in all, you know, this movie suffers a lot from footage from other movies, stock footage from other movies in the Godzilla Showa era, including some very, I'm talking almost offensive levels of stock footage used during the time that King Ghidorah is fighting Anguirus, where they're just basically reusing the stock footage from Destroy All Monsters. So doesn't have a strong chance of being Best of the Best in this era. Then we move on to Godzilla versus Megalon. This is a hit or miss for many people. There's a lot of people who love this movie and a lot of people who absolutely think it is garbage. I kind of fall in the middle. I look, it is a movie that's definitely flawed, definitely can be critical. There's some borderline uncomfortable moments. You know, you kind of wish the kid in this movie wore baggier and longer shorts, and why is he always hanging out with two dudes? You know, there's some questionable decisions on how people survive. You know, you have a scene where Megalon chucks the back of a I don't remember if it was a garbage truck or it was like a storage bin that they were in, and this thing goes flying hundreds of miles. The two in there are just rotating around, and somehow they come out unscathed. Again, yes, we want to suspend our, you know, we want to suspend reality when we go watch a movie, but sometimes you can ask too much, and I think a scene like that's asking too much. But there is great action, and then there's the birth of Jet Jaguar, who to this day is still very popular, so much so that in the animated series he was like kind of like the focal point, like the hero in the movie. But the problem here is that it kind of just falls short. It's more of a kid-friendly movie, and while that's a good thing, I guess in some regards, when you put it up against some of the other versus movies in this era, it just doesn't stand up to them. So, and then finally, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Now look, this is my personal favorite, and with good reason. This is definitely one of the best versus movies in the era, and it has a great sci-fi story. All right, you have Godzilla taking on what everybody thinks in the beginning of the movie is a clone of himself or some sort of other Godzilla, when it turns out to be an alien cyborg controlled by another alien race coming to take over the world with an arsenal that would devastate any nation, way ahead of its time. Great design for Mecha G. Great reveal halfway through the movie. A very good sci-fi story of that kind of mixes in with like an ancient prophecy. There's some wicked scenes in the movie, like when they're on the plane and they see the mountain, and you have a cool agent that I always thought was cool. It's just a lot going on. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of action amongst the humans as well. It's not just, because you don't get a lot of monster action in this movie, believe it or not. If you stand back and look at the movie, you got the scene where Mechagodzilla nearly kills Anguirus, but what's to be expected? It's Anguirus, right? Then you got the first encounter between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, and then you got the end when they finally release King Caesar, and they all three of them fight. But in between that, you got a good story that's getting developed. You have great action amongst the humans. It's not just boring crap. You got this, they're trying to protect the statue and they're being chased. And you got this agent from Interpol that comes in to help them several times. And then you got the base and finding, it's a really good versus movie, among the best, and will definitely be there at the end. So now that we've gone through all the movies, you can kind of see, and if you haven't seen any of these versus movies, I definitely recommend checking them out, but a lot of you guys have, let's be honest, right? And we all have our favorites. My personal favorite has always been Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, but the whole list, when you take away some of the duds in this movie, like, these are not versus movies, but duds like, All Monsters Attack or Son of Godzilla, you got some gems in here too. And when it comes to the versus movies, you have a good, at least 3 or 4 that are really solid. So which one is the best of the best? And after careful evaluation, after having a conversation with God about this list and really taking this seriously and looking at all these fantastic movies and the hard work that went into it, and then looking at the monsters that were in this movie and how impactful could they be, not only across the Showa era, but how impactful they are later on even, because a lot of these monsters in this era went on to be in other movies all the way down the line, right? So the best of the best in terms of versus movies in the Showa era for Godzilla is, yes, as much as it pains me to say that, because I am an avid Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla fan, and that to me is my personal favorite, I gotta give it to Mothra versus Godzilla. First of all, it's a great underdog story. It's a great story about not only corporate greed, it's the odds are stacked against everyone in this movie, right? So you got the corporation taking advantage of and fooling the natives, right? You got the big bad Godzilla taking on a nearly already dying Mothra, and then her little baby twins have to contend with it, right? You got these reporters against all odds trying to trash this corporation, trying to do everything they can to stop them. And there's certain scenes in the movie that are kind of like just like natural justice. So for example, one of the corporations and two of the men that were making a deal in terms of the egg and all this had a big disagreement. One wanted his money, the other one was being kind of stingy about it. They got into a fight. Both of these guys are bad, and one kills the other, and just when you think the other guy's gonna get away with the money, poetic justice as he dies in the building being crushed by Godzilla. And then you have the monster element, right? Here's this monster that is being begged to come and protect the egg, Mothra, all the incantations that they sing and things like that. And finally, she gives it one last run. She's like, look, I'm not gonna beat this guy, but if I can hold him off long enough for my little babies to be born and maybe escape, I got to do that. And it is a very, I've seen this movie so many times, obviously it has no effect, but if you watch this movie for the first time, depending on how old you are, it is a very sad scene to see Mothra kind of fly down and try to protect the egg while, taking a beating from Godzilla. And I just think that overall it's a solid story. it's a story that we've heard a million times, but to have a story that solid within the frame of a kaiju action and kaiju monsters, and then to have a story to be told with the monsters themselves, especially Mothra, I don't see how you could. I don't see how this wouldn't be the best one in the series. There's just so many story elements, not only from the monsters but for the humans, and there's a big versus aspect. Not only the two monsters fighting each other, but corporations and natives and reporters trying to find justice. Corporations taking advantage, natives not being intellectual enough to know when they're getting screwed. There's just a lot of things there that I think speak to a lot of people. And when you take that kind of story and you put it along with great monster action, Mothra vs. Godzilla is the best of the best in terms of versus movies in the Showa era. All right, guys, that is it for this first episode of Godzilla Best of the Best. Stick around, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and if you're not already, and we will have the next part of this series very, very soon. This is Rob signing off for E.T.N, where we don't do news, we just talk entertainment. Take it easy.